They came for me in the last week of September, when the larch on the high slopes had gone to gold, and the first hard frosts were settling into the valleys of the upper Skagit. I was camped alone at the foot of a talus field below Sahaley Arm, 3 days out from the trailhead, doing work of my own that had nothing to do with them. I had hunted things for money for 26 years, things that men in town said did not exist and paid me quietly to be rid of anyway. I was 51 years old and I had scars in places I did not look at, and I had never once advertised. The work found me, it always had. The big one stood at the edge of the trees a long time before I saw him. Dusk coming down blue out of the pass, and the fire small and the wind moving in the hemlocks, and then he was simply there, the way a boulder is there, and I understood he had been there for some while watching me eat. He was better than 8 feet, dark through the shoulders, silvered along the crown and jaw, and he stood with the stillness of something that had never in its life needed to run from anything. I set down the pan and did not reach for the rifle. A man who reaches for the rifle at the wrong moment has usually already made his last good decision some days prior. He watched me. I watched him. Far off, a bull elk bugled once in the dark and quit. There were 2 more behind him in the trees, younger, leaner, restless where the old one was stone. In the last light, the old one came forward across the talus without any sound a body that size ought to make, and he stopped 10 feet from my fire and set down a satchel in the dirt and stepped back. It was a canvas hunting satchel of an old military pattern, mended with rawhide, dark with handling and with years. I looked at him a while. Then I leaned and dragged it to me and opened it. Money. Banded stacks of it, though half the bands had gone to dust and the bills lay loose in their bricks. Hundreds mostly, some 50s. It smelled of earth and cold storage, of a thing kept a long time in the dark under something. I thumbed a stack in the firelight. The bills were old, older than they had any business being. Series from decades gone, faces printed small in the old style, paper soft as cloth. I counted enough of it to see the shape of the sum, and the sum was $200,000. And I sat there in the dark of the North Cascades with a dead man's fortune in my lap, and an animal out of no book watching me across the fire. And what troubled me was not the money. What troubled me was the number. It was a human number. Round, deliberate, priced like a contract. Somebody had taught them what a man costs. I set it aside and said, "All right, show me." I don't know what I expected. What I got was the old one turning and looking off north and east up the valley toward the divide, toward the dark country under Buckner and Booker where the glaciers hang rotten in the couloirs and no trail goes. He looked at it the way a man looks at a door he does not want to open in his own house. The 2 young ones would not look at it at all. Then he did a thing I have thought about many times since. He came around the fire, slow, and he walked a full circle around me where I sat, close enough that I could hear the breath in him, big and slow as a bellows. He looked at my shoulders and my hands, and he looked, I would swear to it, at my teeth when I spoke. As a man might walk around a horse he was thinking of buying. When he had made his circle, he stood a moment. Then he touched 2 fingers, gentle as you please, to the barrel of my rifle where it leaned against the log, and he took his hand away, and he and the young ones went back into the timber and were gone the way smoke goes. I sat up most of that night with the fire built high, not from fear exactly, from arithmetic. In the morning I found where they had stood in the trees, and in the duff there I found a rifle cartridge, unfired, so old the brass had gone brown as creekstone, a .348 Winchester. Nobody has carried a .348 into these mountains in a long, long time. I put it in my pocket, and I did not think hard enough about it, and that was the first mistake I made in that country, and it was not the last. It took me a day and a half to come up under the divide. The country changed as I went the way country does when you leave the maps behind. The valley narrowed and the timber went from hemlock to silver fir to a stunted subalpine crumholtz, bent all one direction by winters no man had sat through, and above that the rock began, black and wet and streaked with old snow, rising into cloud. There is a great deal of talk about wilderness from people who have driven past it. This was not that. This was country that did not know my name and had no plans to learn it. The creeks ran gray with rock flour. The silence up there was not an absence of sound. It was a presence, the way cold is a presence, and it lay over everything. I cut their sign everywhere once I knew what I was looking at. Worn paths through the huckleberry that no elk made, Sleeping hollows lined with pulled moss under overhung ledges, a weir of stacked stones in a creek, old and mended and old again beneath the mending. They had been in this drainage a long time, longer than the name on the map, longer maybe than the map, a nation of them, hidden in the folds of the divide, and something was eating them. I found the first one on the second evening, below a bench of ancient cedar at the head of a hanging valley. I smelled it before I saw it, and I have smelled most of what the woods can offer, and this sat wrong even so. The kill was 10 days old, maybe 12. It had been a young male by the frame of it. I will not set down here what remained. I have seen what bears leave and what cats leave and what men leave, which is worst, and this was none of those. Whatever fed here fed with a method. It had taken what it wanted in a certain order and left the rest arranged, not scattered, and it had hung a portion in the low limbs of a cedar the way a leopard is said to do half a world away, well beyond the reach of anything on 4 feet, or on 2, unless the 2 stood a great deal taller than me. Around the site the ground told its story in the usual hand. The young one had run. Something had run him down out of the cedar shadows in under 40 yards, and 40 yards is nothing, and that animal could have covered ground. In the churned duff at the edge of it all I found one track pressed into black mud, half filled with needlefall, and I crouched over it a long while with the light going. It was not a bear. It was not one of theirs either, though it was near their shape and near their size, and I told myself I was looking at some rogue thing of their own kind gone wrong, an outcast turned to feeding on its own nation, because that story fit the evidence and it fit everything I knew, and a man believes the story that fits. But the heel of that track was narrow, cut hard at the back edge, square, like something worn and not grown. I looked at it and the dark came down the walls of that valley like water filling a well, and somewhere above me in the rocks, far off, something moved a stone, and the sound came down small and singular through the cold and then quit, and did not come again. I told myself it was the frost working. I built no fire that night. Morning came gray and without ceremony. Clouds sat on the divide and the rock ran black with meltwater, and I ate cold and went on up the drainage with the rifle slung and the old cartridge riding in my pocket like a tooth. I want to set down how I understood things that morning, because a man ought to be honest about what he believed and when. I believed I was hunting an outcast, one of their own kind gone wrong in the head or the blood, turned to feeding on its nation the way a cattle-killing lion turns. And I believed the narrow heel on that track was deformity or injury, and I believed the money was money they had gathered over long years from wrecks and dead men's camps and the pockets of the lost. All of it fit. That is the trouble with a story that fits. It closes the door behind itself. The country above the cedar bench broke into a series of hanging basins, stepped one above the other like the works of some ruined stair, each with its dead little tarn and its apron of heather going rust-colored with the frost. I found more of their sign, and it was old, and it thinned as I climbed. They did not come up here anymore. The paths worn through the huckleberry stopped at a certain elevation, as if at a fence line, and above that line the country was empty of them altogether, and the emptiness had a shape. Animals leave a place for reasons. The reasons are always written down somewhere if you can read. I read all that day and into the next. The second kill site was in the third basin, older than the first, a female by what the frame told me, and the same method in it, the same order of feeding, the same portion hung high, this time in a dead white bark at the basin's edge, gone to leather in the wind. Whatever did this did not eat like a scavenger, and did not eat like a bear laying on fat against winter. It ate like a thing keeping a schedule. Past the third basin the drainage pinched into a gorge, and I climbed out of it on a game trail no wider than my boot, and came up onto a shoulder of moraine below the glacier. And there, in the lee of a great split boulder, I found the camp. Not their camp, a man's camp. There was a rock shelter walled up at its mouth with dry stacked stone, laid tight and true by somebody who knew walls, and the stone was furred over with 50 years of black lichen. Inside, the roof ran back 20 feet into the dark of the boulder. There was a bed frame built of white bark poles and lashed with wire. There was a stone hearth with a smoke-blackened chimney crevice above it. There were shelves, cans on the shelves with the labels gone to nothing and the seams bulged with age. A folding shovel gone to rust. Snowshoes of bent ash and rawhide hung on a peg. the rawhide chewed away by rodents in some decade past. And on wooden pins above the bed, laid the way a man lays the thing he loves, a rifle. A Winchester Model 71 in .348, the steel gone brown, the bore choked with dust and mouse litter. Nobody had touched it in a lifetime. I stood in that dead man's room with my breath showing and the light coming gray through the doorway, and I took the cartridge from my pocket and stood it upright on the shelf by the cans. Same brass, same year of manufacture near enough. The round in my pocket had come from this shelter, carried down the mountain to my fire in a hand that had no business knowing what it was. Under the bed frame was a steel ammunition box, military, the paint scoured away. The latch fought me and gave. Inside were papers wrapped in oilcloth, and a pocket notebook with a pencil still holed through the spiral, and a leather billfold. In the billfold was a Washington state hunting license issued in 1957 to a man named Emmett Rule Castle of Marble Mount, and a photograph of a woman standing in front of a filling station squinting into old sunlight. I carried the notebook to the doorway for the light. The pencil hand was small and hard, and it did not waste. The first pages were tallies: weather, mileage, meat. Then, deeper in, dated in October of that year. They come to me at Doubtful Creek. I was not afeard of them, and I believe that is why me. The big silver one walked a circle round me like a buyer at a stock sale. Looked at my teeth. I ought to have walked out then. I stood very still in that doorway. Outside, the wind moved on the moraine, and the glacier ticked and settled in its bed the way old ice does, like something turning over in sleep. They paid. God help me, the money is real, and it is more money than I have seen or will see. There is a thing up here killing them, and they cannot kill it themselves. I have seen what it leaves. It is not a bear. Do not tell Ada the amount till I am down. Then pages of the hunt. He was good. I could read that he was good. Better in that country than I was. A man born under those mountains when the towns below were still stump ranches. He tracked the thing 3 weeks. He wrote down the narrow heel. He wrote down the feeding order, same as I had read it 70 years before I read it. He wrote, "It eats them in a certain way, and I have quit trying to say what way in these pages. It hangs a portion. No animal God made hangs a portion." And later, the hand smaller now, crowded, found where it dens under the ice. There is gear in there, old gear, a pack frame older than mine and boot leather, and I do not know what a thing like this wants with boot leather, and I have been trying not to know all day. And later still, the last dated page, the pencil pressed so hard it had torn through in places. It is not what they told me. They did not lie, for they cannot talk, but I lied to myself on their behalf, which is the same. I understand the circle now. Why he walked the circle round me and looked at my shoulders and my teeth. You do not look at a hired man that way. Ada, I am going to finish it tomorrow and come down, and I will burn this whole... The sentence quit there. The pages after it were blank, and then they were not blank. There was one more entry, undated, and the hand was wrong. It was Casel's hand, the way your face in creek water is your face. Everything in it stretched and slow, the letters half an inch tall, the pencil held by something that remembered writing rather than knew it. It said one word: down. I did not sleep in the shelter. I want that written plainly, that I was not fool enough for that, though what I did instead was not much wiser. I moved a half-mile off and made a cold camp in the rocks and lay there with the rifle on my chest, and I built the new story the way a man builds a fire in the rain, hunching over it, feeding it whatever will take. And the new story was this: Emmett Castle never came down. Emmett Castle went into that country in 1957 after something, and the something ended him, or the mountain did, and what fed on that nation now was a man. Some heir of his blood or his madness, some line of feral men denned up under the ice for 3 generations, wearing boot leather, keeping a schedule, the narrow heel, the hung meat. Men do that. Only men do that. It was a terrible story, and I took a kind of comfort in it, because a man, any man, whatever he has become, is a thing I have handled before. That story lasted until moonrise. The cloud broke apart late, and the moon came off the glacier so bright it threw shadow, and in that light I saw it come down the moraine crest a quarter mile above me, and every story I had died together in my chest, quietly, the way a fire dies when the door of a room is opened onto winter. It was flesh. I have been asked since, by the only man I ever told, whether it might have been a trick of moonlight. And it was flesh. It moved with weight. The stones rolled under it. It went upright, and it was taller than the old silver one by 2 feet or more, and it was wrong in a way I had no drawer to put it in. Too long through the arms, too narrow through the heel. It wore something, rags of something, hides or canvas gone black with years, and there was a shape on its back that my eye kept refusing until my eye gave in, and the shape was a pack frame. Old, bent ash, same as the snowshoes on the peg, riding high on its shoulders the way a man wears one who has worn one all his life. It stopped on the crest with the moon behind it. It turned its head and looked down the moraine, not at me, past me, down the long fall of the country toward the valleys where that hidden nation slept in their moss hollows. And it stood there looking the way a farmer looks out over his own acres in the evening. Then it went on north along the crest toward the ice and was gone. And the wind came across the rocks, and I lay there unmoving until the moon was down. Whatever it was, it had been a long time becoming it. And I understood that I could still leave. I want that written too. There was a moment on that moraine, moon gone, stars burning cold over the divide, when the whole thing lay plain as a fork in a trail. Down was still down. The money would spend. Nothing bound me to that country but a satchel of dead men's bills and my word given by firelight to a thing that could not speak. At gray dawn I rose stiff with frost, and I looked a long while down the valley, and then I turned and went up, toward the ice, and I have never been able to write out the whole of why. The glacier came down off the divide in 2 lobes with a spine of black rock between them, and the ice at its foot was old ice, dense and blue and dirty with the ground bones of the mountain, riddled underneath with the caves that meltwater cuts. I could hear water running in the dark under my boots all that morning, a river going somewhere under the ice, and its sound rose up through the crevasse mouths, cold and hollow like the mountain breathing through its teeth. I cut the trail at mid-morning where the moraine met the ice. The narrow heel, plain in the frost skin, going up. It made no effort to hide itself, and that told me things I did not want told. An animal hides its coming and going. This went up the middle of the ice like a man going up his own road, and I followed it the way you follow a road, and the cloud came down again, and the world went to gray stone and gray ice, and the sound of water under everything. The den was where Castle's notebook had put it 70 years gone. A cave mouth in the flank of the north lobe, where the ice had pulled away from a wall of rock, tall as a barn door and dark as any dark I have stood before, and the water sound coming up out of it, and something else coming out of it too, on the moving air. Smell of old hide and old smoke and old meat, and under those a mineral cold smell like the inside of a well. I want to write down that I stood at that mouth and weighed things like a rational man. I stood at that mouth the way you stand at the edge of deep water. That is the truth of it. And then I went in with the rifle up because going in was the only door my life had left standing open. Inside, the ice roof rose and hung in scalloped vaults, blue where any light found it, and the floor was rock, worn smooth in a path. A path. Worn by feet along one line the way stone in old churches is worn, and I walked on that path in the dark with a small light in my offhand and the water going by unseen somewhere below, and I came into the room. I will call it a room. The ice stood off the rock in a great chamber there, and what was in that chamber I saw in pieces as the light passed over it, and my mind put the pieces together slower than the eye took them in, the way it does when the whole is a thing the mind has voted against. There was gear. Castle had written that there was gear in there, and he had written it small, and it was not small. There were pack frames. I counted in the end 11 of them, hung on stubs of rock along one wall, hung neat, in an order, and the newest of them was ash and rawhide out of Castle's century, and the oldest of them was a thing of antler and sinew and cedar width that belonged behind museum glass, and between those two ran the others like the rings of a stump, canvas and wood, hide and bone, each one a man's lifetime older than its neighbor. Below them, boots, rows of dead men's boots gone to iron. Rifles, too, 3 of them, a lever gun and something older with a hammer, and something older yet that was only a barrel and a rotted stock, laid parallel on a shelf of rock, muzzles all pointing the same way, into the mountain. Not trophies. I have seen trophies. Trophies are kept the way a man keeps a boast. These were kept the way a man keeps his father's tools. And on the floor of that chamber, in a ring of stones blackened by fires older than the treaties that named this country, lay the fresh things. Moss bedding pulled and piled, a stack of split white bark, split, stacked, and meat hung from a spike of rock, high, a portion, cured in the cold, and I knew the frame of what the portion had been, and I stood in the dark with my light on it, and made myself know it. I heard it then. Behind me, between me and the door of the world, a stone shifting under weight, and I turned and put the light on it, and it stood in the mouth of the room and did not come on. Close. It was worse, and it was sadder, both at once, and the sadness was the worse of the two. 9 feet, 10. The rags on it had been hide sewn once, sewn with a needle, gone black and slick with the years, and the pack frame rode its shoulders in cracked straps grown partway into the hide of it. Its arms hung past its knees. Its face I will not put down here in full, because I have found there are things the page keeps that the mind then cannot put away. But I will say the eyes were not an animal's eyes. An animal's eyes take you in as weather, as food, as threat. These took me in as news, as a thing arriving that had been long expected, and dreaded, and wanted, all of it moving in that face at once, and no face God made for such traffic. It looked at the rifle in my hands the way the old silver one had looked at it by my fire. It looked at my shoulders, at the width of me. Then it did the thing that broke the last story I had. It reached up slow with one long hand, and it slid the pack frame off its shoulders, straps parting where they had grown in, and it set the frame down against the wall at the end of the row of 11, making it 12, making room. It set it down gentle and square with the others, and it turned back to me, and stood with its arms loose, and its head bowed a little under the ice, and it waited. And standing there in the cold with my light shaking on it, I finally did the arithmetic I had been carrying unfinished since a fire 3 nights old. The circle walked around me like a buyer at a stock sale. My teeth looked at, my shoulders. You do not look at a hired man that way. You look that way at what you mean to keep. 11 frames on the wall, and each one a man who came up into this country with a rifle and a price in his pack. The money old, the money smelling of the dark, the same money, passed down the mountain and carried back up, seed corn, and the number taught to them long ago by the first man who ever named his price at the edge of a fire. They had never once in all that time hired a man to destroy their monster. Their monster was worn out. They had hired its replacement. It ate them. That was the bargain under the bargain, the tithe that hidden nation paid to whatever this office was, one of their own on a schedule to keep the god fed and the god's country empty of anything that would draw men. And the paths through the huckleberry stopped at that certain line not out of fear, out of observance. And the young one that had run those 40 yards had not been running when it started. It had been walking. They had walked it up there. I had read the churned ground and believed the story that fit, and a man believes the story that fits. Castle, I said. The sound of the name went into it like a blade going into water. No wound you could see, only a shudder along the whole length. Its mouth worked. Whatever throat it had was 70 years gone from words, and I watched it fight for one and lose, and fight again, and what came out was ruined and slow, and it was the word from the notebook. Down, it said, and lifted one long arm and pointed past me, into the dark, into the mountain, to the 12th stub of rock and the empty floor beneath it, and then turned the hand over, palm up, open, showing me my place, or offering it. To this day I do not know if that word was a warning or a welcome, and I have come to believe it had stopped being either. It was just the last thing left in him, and he gave it to whoever came, the way a bell gives its one note whether you ring it in joy or in fire. Then it came for me, and there was no wind-up to it and no sound. One breath it stood mourning at the room's mouth, and the next, the room was all motion. And I want to be plain that I do not believe it came in hate. It came the way a man comes to a task he has done all his life and can do no other way. It came to finish the making of me. The first rifle shot filled that chamber like the world splitting and did nothing that I could see. The second I do not remember firing. It had me then, and the pack frames went off the wall in the dark, and the antique rifles went, and we were on the worn path and then off it, and I was a strong man all my life, and I was a child in its hands, and it was carrying me, not rending me, carrying me deeper, down the path toward the water sound, and I got the muzzle turned in the black between us and fired the third shot with the steel against it. Everything stopped. The ice took the sound and gave it back and took it again, fainter, and then there was only the river below us in the dark going on. It set me down. I have puzzled over that more than any of it. It did not drop me. It set me down on the smooth stone almost carefully, the way you set down a thing you were asked to look after, and it went down the way a lodgepole goes, slow at the start, and lay along the path with its face toward the inside of the mountain, and one long arm reaching on past its head, reaching toward the room and the wall and the 12 stubs of rock, and its hand opened and closed once on the stone, and opened, and the fingers spread out flat and settled, and that hand had sewn hides with a needle once, and pitched hay in the Skagit bottoms, and signed for a license in the year 1957, and touched a woman's face outside a filling station in old Sunlight, and it quit moving all at once the way a clock quits, between one thing and the next, and the cold began taking the shape of it before I could stand. I found my light where it had fallen. On a thong at the dead thing's throat, grown half into it, hung a ring of yellow gold, small, a woman's size. I got out of the ice on my hands and knees more than my feet, and the gray day outside stood so bright after that dark that I knelt on the moraine a while blind, breathing, bleeding some, alive in the way you are alive after, which is a different way and does not entirely wear off. They were there. Of course they were there. The old silver one out front, and behind him more than I had ever thought that country held, 40 of them, 50, standing off among the boulders in the falling cloud in a wide half circle open toward the ice, still as the stones they stood among. Not one of them looked at the cave. Every one of them was looking at me. They did not move when I stood. I got the rifle up out of habit, though there were 2 rounds left in it and 50 of them on the moraine, and no man alive could have made that arithmetic come out. But it was not that kind of standing. There was no press in it, no crowding forward. They stood among the boulders in the falling cloud the way a congregation stands, and the old silver one came out from them across the rock, slow, and stopped before me, and in his 2 hands he carried the satchel. I had left it cached under stones a day and a half below. He had it now, and he set it at my feet the way he had set it by my fire, and he stepped back, and all that hidden nation watched me with the cave at my back breathing its cold out over us all. Payment rendered. Work complete. That is what I told myself it meant, standing there bled and shaking with the gray day going dim. And underneath that telling, in the part of a man that does the real accounting, I knew what I was looking at. You do not pay a hired man twice. I had watched that old one's face when he set the money down, and there was no gratitude in it, and no fear of me, and no grief for the thing dead under the ice, though grief was owed and I believe it was paid elsewhere, in whatever way they pay it. What was in his face was the thing that had been in it at my fire when he walked his circle and looked at my teeth. A buyer's patience. The stock was sound. The stock had proved itself past all doubting now, and the price was met, and there was no hurry anymore in all the world. Because it was never a bounty. I understood it there on the moraine, all of it at once, the way you understand a sentence in a language you have been hearing all your life without knowing you knew it. The money was not what you pay a man to destroy a monster. It was what you pay for a man. 11 frames on that wall, and every one of them was a man who had been strong enough and hard enough to end the worn-out god before him, because that was the test entire. That was the whole of the hiring. Nothing else could prove a body fit for the office, except the office's own ending at that body's hands. Castle had ended one. The one before Castle had ended one. Back and back, frame by frame, antler and sinew, to whatever the first arrangement was, struck at the edge of whatever the first fire was, between this nation and the first strong man who came into their country with a price. They did not keep a monster to protect them. They grew one, over and over, out of us. And the tithe went on, and the high basins stayed empty, and the paths through the huckleberry stopped at that certain line, and no plane ever spotted them, and no trail ever crossed them, and no man ever came down out of that country to say what he had seen. The God kept them hidden. Men make the best gods for that work. Men know what men look for. I did not take the satchel. I want that written, for whatever the writing of it is worth. I looked at the old one a long moment, and I said, "No," and my voice came out of me strange in all that silence, small against the ice, and I turned from the money and walked, and they parted. That was the terrible thing. They parted like water and let me through, and not one of them so much as turned its head to watch me go. And a man who has been in this work as long as I have knows what it means when the thing you are leaving does not watch you leave. It means the thing is not worried. It means the door you think you are walking out of is a door in name only. I came down out of that country in 3 days. The weather broke behind me, and the first snow of the year came onto the divide and closed it. And I stood at dusk on the last ridge where the trail begins again and looked back. And the clouds stood on the high country like a lid on a well. And under them somewhere the ice lay over its room and its river and its 12 stubs of rock, one of them empty, and the empty one was mine. I knew it the way you know your own boots. I had been measured for it by firelight, and I had passed every test they set, including the last one, including the mercy of setting me down. The satchel was on my porch when I got home. I live a long way up a bad road and I tell no one where, and it sat against my door out of the rain, and the canvas was dark with handling and with years. That was 5 years ago this month. I did not spend the money. I burned a brick of it the first winter, in the stove, to see if I could, and it made no difference to anything, and I knew it would not. The rest sits where I put it. I took Castle's billfold to Marblemount that spring and asked old questions in the store there until a woman past 90 told me Ada Castle had waited 11 years and then moved to her sister's in Wenatchee and waited there too. And I drove to the cemetery in Wenatchee and found her stone. And I buried the billfold and the photograph in the grass against it with my hands. And I did not bury the ring. I have thought many times about why I kept the ring, and I have quit lying to myself about it. I kept it for the same reason he kept it. That is the truth, and I will let it stand. The change is slow. I understand now that it must be, that the cave does not make you. The cave only receives you when the making is far enough along, and the making is done by the country and the bargain working in a man together, quiet, the way water works in stone. I do not feel the cold the way I did. I sleep less and eat more, and my hands trouble the gloves I have worn for a decade. And this past September, splitting wood, I caught my shadow on the shed wall in the low evening light and stood looking at it a long while, at the length of the arms of it, and then I went in and shut the door and did not split wood in the evening anymore. A doctor would have words for all of it. Age and old injuries, and a man alone too long with one story. I have not gone to a doctor. There are things you do not take to town. They have come twice that I know of. Once the second autumn, one of the young ones, standing at the edge of my timber at dusk, not hiding, just seeing how the stock was coming along. And once last winter, the old silver one himself, and he stood in the falling snow at the end of my meadow for the better part of an hour, and I stood on my porch with the rifle in the crook of my arm, and we looked at one another across all that white, and neither of us pretended anything, and then he went back into the trees. He is in no hurry. Why would he be? The one before me lasted 70 years, and the office has never once gone unfilled. And the money always comes back up the mountain in the end, in the pack of whatever strong man carries it, believing he was hired. I read Castle's last true page some nights. It is not what they told me. He wrote that the night before he went to finish it, and he went anyway. And I used to think that was his ruin, that he should have run. I know better now. He did run, in his way. He fought the making for years down here in the low country, same as I am fighting it. And the country called him back up when it was done with the waiting, the way it calls everything back that belongs to it. The bell gives its one note. Last week the larch went gold on the high slopes. I saw it from my porch, that yellow coming down the far mountains like a slow fire. And I stood there with my coffee going cold in my hand, and I felt the pull of the high, empty country under the divide, the way you feel water moving when you stand in a river, steady, patient, all one direction. There is a nation up there sleeping in the moss. There is a room under the ice with a place made ready on the wall. I am still a man this morning. The stove is hot and the coffee is strong, and the first snow is on the peaks, and the mountains stand up white and enormous in the sun, older than the bargain, older than the nation that keeps it, and they do not care which of us walks up into them, or what he is when he walks down, or whether he ever does. And they will stand there all the same when there is no one left in that country to feed, and the snow will fall on the ice, and the river under it will go on running in the dark. I have waxed my boots. That is all I will say about it.